Welcome in, good friend of the site, good friend of mine, Chris Lee, Southeastern 16, Vandy 247, member of 24/7 Sports. Chris, great to talk to you. We've had a little bit of a pre-show conversation. We probably should just hit the button. We were talking baseball and towns
Yeah.
and schools and life and a little bit of everything else. But we are heading into week two of the SEC baseball season. Ole Miss with a weekend they desperately need because they are at the Missouri Tigers, the one team in the league who does not care. So you need to get as many of those as you can get. And Chris, I guess we'll start there. I've got a lot of questions, but with the local crowd being Ole Miss fans, Ole Miss 1 out away from taking a series over number three Arkansas last week in Oxford. A little deceiving. They didn't play as well as maybe that would suggest in some ways. I think the book is still open and out on Ole Miss. But when you look at Missouri and what they did in this non-league, you lose a game to Alabama A&M, you lose a game to Penn State 10-0, you lose two to Binghamton, you lose two to Evansville. They are bad. Now they could have beaten LSU twice over the weekend, but they didn't get any of them. Are we looking at an SEC school, despite the rest of the league being so good, that is going to be in the 200s in RPI and be a killer here?
Um, Boy, I think just playing the games will get them out of 200.
Okay.
But I look at like how many are they going to win? I'll tell you this though, I was surprised they played LSU to a 7-6 game,
I
and
know.
Carrick Jackson I really like figured some stuff out. Like I think I don't remember last year they kind of maybe pitched their better guys on game two. I mean he's moneyballing it together isn't even the term for it. It's something beyond that, but they don't have a lot of talent. I think they've got enough where they can maybe string it together with pitching and take a game from almost anybody, which is really scary then because if you
That's
don't
actually a
sweep
bad
all
thing for the
three,
league. Correct.
yeah, but it's yeah. I mean, look, that's a series like if you're Ole Miss, and I didn't see it much of it, but I think they were. Somebody told me they were maybe 1-0 and Pano error away from winning that series against Arkansas, which then you're really feeling a lot better
It was
at
literally
the end of
one
the
out. They
day.
had two outs in the ninth with the lead on Sunday.
Yeah. I mean, and that's baseball for you. You saw some teams lose some games like that, but yeah, that's I don't know that I'm not a big fan of RPI. You see these teams early in the
Hmm.
season. If you just want to get a giggle, somebody will be 5-7. That you didn't know how a baseball program, and they're nine in the RPI because they played
Uh-huh.
LSU and Arkansas in weekend series. But yeah, I mean that is going to be a problem. Is it that you don't want to be 13-17 in the league on Selection Sunday, and maybe have Missouri on your schedule with a loss potentially.
The league is, I mean, we're doing this broken record. It's every single sport. You just saw basketball put 14 in the NCAA tournament. Football was football, but downstream. Ole Miss last year in softball got into the NCAA tournament at 7-17 in the SEC because everybody gets in. Tennis, golf. I mean, the SEC with the money and the talent and everything, they're overtaking every sport, and they have baseball for a really long time. I had this theory early in the year that a team that had a good non-con, and Ole Miss would fit because they go to Arlington and they take one from Clemson, who's 20-2 right now. They beat Arizona on opening day, and the Wildcats have kind of figured things out after losing three in Arlington. Given where the metrics are going to go, is this the year we get a 12-18 team into the NCAA tournament?
I mean, we've seen it a few times before, right?
Never 12-18, only 12-17 if they didn't play a full
Oh,
30.
maybe, and this is where I wish we had like mainstream predictive metrics for college
Correct.
baseball. I
I
know
know.
D1 was trying that thing with the Diamond Sports rating. Last time I checked, they didn't even launch that this year.
Hmm.
If you want to find anything, and I'll do this up just for fun. Kenneth Massey's one of the few people that keeps track of this, and I haven't looked at it in a couple of days. But let me just pull up what he's got because RPI again is very flawed. This is going to be based on scoring margins
Okay.
and stuff like that. Yeah, like okay, right now he's got number one in the country, Tennessee, followed by two Alabama, uh, three LSU, four Georgia, five Arkansas, six Texas, seven Oklahoma, and then we've got let's see, Auburn down at 20, Vandy at 21, Ole Miss at 27, South Carolina at 28, Kentucky at 29. Now, again, I don't know how this compares in terms of being descriptive to Ken Pomeroy or Bart Torvik, but I look at him for years. They seem to do a pretty decent job. if you're living in a world where that is as mainstream as Ken Palm is for basketball,
Mm-hmm.
I think your argument's pretty clear. And that's what just got the SEC 14 teams. We're living in this world with RPI and baseball that we just hadn't gotten past for reasons
No.
I can't figure why. So I don't know. I feel like media platforms are so powerful, right? And the SEC gets so much TV exposure, and ESPN's got a big contract with the SEC. I mean, if I'm running SEC baseball right now, I'm taking what I just threw you and trotting it out there right now to pave the way for when we get to May to get as many of my teams in as possible. And by the way, I don't think it would be undeserved, more than likely.
We've just created these false ceilings in sports, and everyone's kind of had
Yes.
one in different ways. I mean, it's been, like I said, for whatever reason, 12 and 18's never gotten it done, no matter what anybody's done in the non-conference, no matter what your RPI was. We've gotten a little better. I mean, there was a day where LSU, even at 13 and 17, was left out with the 24 RPI. I think it was. I think it was 2011 when that happened. There's been some different years, but I mentioned softball. There's none of that type of stigma on softball. So they go, nope, best teams, they're
Yeah.
all in. Ole Miss 7 and 17, but we've had this kind of this false thing. It's why the SEC is doing absolutely the right thing and sending everyone to Hoover. Don't create
Yeah.
a line of delineation that you do not have to create. So I'm just kind of curious what we do, because I don't know if this is right, but I had a coach in the SEC, not Ole Miss, tell me back in the fall, they thought there were 19 programs in the country that had at least $1 million in NIL. They thought 15 of them were in the SEC.
And I'm thinking that the others would be maybe
Florida
Oregon State,
State is for sure.
Clemson, Florida State, maybe
No,
not even Clemson.
Clemson's not there. No, no, no. I've actually got a
Okay.
pretty decent bit of intimacy in Clemson's program. What Bakich has done there is phenomenal. I'll give you a
Yeah.
stat here. Last year, this is true. They made the Super Regional. They lost to Florida there in Game 3. Crazy game to end their season. Clemson's entire NIL was $39,000 last year.
Well, and then they lost Billy Barlow to Florida. They
And Amick.
lost, yeah, they lost what, two starters
Mm-hmm.
to South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, Bakich is and a good dude too, by the way.
He is.
That's yeah. The economic world that we're living in is just nuts.
Do you think we're still at the point of 15 of the SEC teams being regional contenders at this point? I mean, what are we looking at as far as not being able to write anybody off at this point? It's everybody, right?
Yeah, let me pull up Warren Nolan for RPI. Because
Sure.
again, I think the RPI is garbage in a
But
lot of
where do
ways,
you
but it can
level
certainly
the
be
RPI
disqualified.
at? Like second week of April before we really know for sure even how it's going to kind of baseline though?
Um, I don't know. Maybe. I mean, maybe
Okay.
halfway through SEC play.
Yeah.
Let me see what you've got. Here's the one that's going to be super interesting is Texas A&M, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because first of all, I have no idea where that's going. Second of all, their RPI, as of, I'll see if it changed yesterday. They were 118 coming into the week, Chase.
118. Wow.
Like, I don't know at what point that becomes like you reach a point where you've done so much damage that you can't get out from under it. And I have to think that like if they're close, that name and everybody's knowledge. No, they're 120. They won a game yesterday and dropped. Um, Mississippi State is 89. LSU, which is top 5 team in the country, is 55, and then that'll get figured out. But right now, you've got what, 13 of the 16 programs in the top 40.
Okay.
No, I'm sorry, 12 of the top 16. LSU's at 55, State's at 89. I think those are. I mean, yeah. I'm going to be very curious what they need to do to make up ground to get in the picture.
Because we haven't seen I guess we've seen it, but we've only seen it from like the Missouri types who can't put non-con schedules together and they have a lot of games where it just kind of messes up their RPI. I can't think of a time, Chris, where we have a traditional power schedule team in the SEC that can't just go 14 and 16, 15 and 15 and get into the NCAA tournament. Like my mind
Yeah.
is completely separating that outside of, that Georgia team that year that needed to be over 500 overall, but it still wasn't an RPI issue. It was just a record
Yeah.
issue at that point.
Well, and let's go back. What was it? 2 weeks ago. I think I don't remember if it was D1 or Baseball America. 13 of the top 22 teams were from the SEC.
Hmm.
I mean, so intuitively, everybody knows how great the league is, and I still think the thing that shows how tough the league is was Ole Miss and Mississippi State the 2 years after they won national titles. They don't even make Hoover a couple of those years, which is fascinating. But yeah, I mean, and I think back to the culture too. Something's got to change around Selection Monday because, like, and like you saw people point to this in basketball all the time. Like, well, Texas shouldn't get in because they won 6 games in conference play. Well, guess what? Take a look at the selection sheet. Conference record is nowhere on there.
Hmm.
So I don't care what you think about it; it's not there. Baseball, we make a big deal about it. And I wonder what would happen if you put Missouri back in any other league, the Big 12.
Uh-huh.
I think some years they were good enough to get in. I know I'm going around the bend to hit a lot of stuff, but I mean, it's a fascinating question. Is this the year that people eventually it starts to dawn on them that, hey, we're seeing these leagues win national titles and fall into irrelevance for a couple of years because the league is so tough? Or is there a common sense that says, hey, this league probably deserves 13 or 14?
And I ask these questions because I think I'm probably doing a bad job from an interview or a podcast standpoint because what's actually on my mind, I'm burying the lead, which is simply Ole Miss trying to get back to the NCAA tournament and where they are as a program and a team right now because they're coming off this. I told you they were 17 and 43 the last two SEC seasons after the national title, and they're now 1 and 2 after losing the 2 out of 3 to Arkansas at home. And Mike Bianco is on some level of a hot seat. Now, he spent a lot of time on the hot seat throughout my tenure covering him over the last 20 years in weird ways and different things, but they owe him a ton of money, so I don't know where that's going to sit at this time. But when you look at Ole Miss, getting back into the tournament is considered a success at this point. I mean, look, if they get on some run and maybe they're in a host conversation, then that's gravy and we'll have that conversation at the time. But right now, I'm just trying to set up a baseline for Ole Miss at 13 wins and to get them back into a regional for the first time since 22. Um, and I wonder a little bit just how good you have to be, because look, Ole Miss is better than last year. They're tougher, they're better mentally, they're older. They've had some good portal pickups despite losing three tremendous losses in Liam Doyle, Andrew Fisher, and Wes Mendez, especially on the pitching staff side with Mendez and Doyle. And when I look at it, people ask me, "Hey, how good is Ole Miss?" And I said, "Well, I don't know because I don't know how good you have to be in this league." I think Ole
Yeah.
Miss is a top 25 team nationally, but that could also mean they're 13th in the SEC and they're out of the NCAA tournament picture because of what record ends up at that point. And that goes for NIL, that goes for coaching staff, that goes for paying it off. Because look, if you want to get rid of Mike Bianco, okay, feel free, but you're going to pay him $4 to $5 million. You still got to fund the NIL to make the team competitive, and you got to pay the new guy a ton of money to come in and get in this league and to try to do it. I mean, I've been
Yeah.
for years I've been pushing for Eric Bakich if Mike gets let go, but he's not coming for free. He's making 1.2 at
Yeah.
Clemson right now, so you better pay if you're going to do that. I've covered this a long time. I feel like it's something I'm very knowledgeable about, and yet I still can't completely figure out where Ole Miss currently is in this league, and then even what their floor and their ceiling is inside of that, because it's changed so rapidly and it feels so
Yeah.
year to year right now.
Yeah. I mean, look, baseball has changed so much. Like when I'm going to say 80% of the time, if not more, that you and I have covered SEC baseball. What was the old thing? It was like you did once a guy committed to a school, not even
Hmm.
signed, committed. You didn't
Hmm.
touch another guy's commitment.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to give you two stories I heard. I'm not going to name names, but these
Okay.
both happened within the league last year.
Okay.
You gotta big school that's hosting a weekend against a lesser school, and I'm debating how much to say. Let's just say offers were made then and there. Okay.
During the weekend.
Yeah, and the story I'll tell you off air. It's pretty
Okay.
funny.
Okay.
Uh, Another big time star in this league, I'm told, had his door knocked on by another coaching staff within the league when this team was in his city.
Oh wow.
Yeah, a hotel room visit. What would you think about, you know, switching sides here? Now think about how far that apart that is to what you and I are used to when you don't even call somebody else's commitment. And that's just one of a million things we can get
For
into. And I
for a
think you've seen some coaches. Yeah, yeah.
from
You
a
probably got your own
progression.
set of stories, right?
Well,
Yeah,
what the thought that came to mind was the progression of that because you're right. So in 2007, Mike Bianco and Pat Murphy got into it during a super regional when Murphy was at Arizona State and almost fought on the field. Both teams came out of the dugouts and they almost had a fight. It was over Kyle Rowling, who had been committed to Ole Miss, and Arizona State stole him, and there was like this big thing back and forth between them.
yeah,
You had apologies. You would call a coach would call another kid accidentally and then call the head coach and go, "Hey, I didn't know. I'm sorry. Just we're cool. I had no idea." That was as
yeah,
recent as 5, 6, 7 years ago. I mean, that was really similar. And then the middle step was, and I've talked to Mike and other people about this, was you would have a coach call a summer coach and go, "Hey, we really like Joe over there, and if he was interested, we'd
yeah,
probably be a little interested. Why don't you holler at him and you do that?" And you kind of had that middle
yeah,
ground that moved toward this. But now, and it's where the fans are right to be frustrated, and it's just a sign of the times. You take Andrew Fisher and Liam Dole, who went to
yeah,
Tennessee, and they're thriving with the Vols. Well, number one, they came to you through the transfer portal, and you probably did, you know,
yeah,
pamper or
yeah,
whatever word to get them anyway. I knew Andrew Fisher's name in March of the previous season. I mean, it wasn't like he was a
yeah.
brand new guy that was coming in, you just happened upon in the summer. So when they leave you too, you can't be surprised. But where we're
Right.
getting, and it's the baseball version of all the football NIL problem, is Fisher and Dole both signed new agreements with the Ole Miss collectives. They thought they had
Yeah,
them completely over here on the side and we're moving on to the next thing. And then last day you could, or the last few days you could get in, they jump in the portal, they leave, and because they wanted it to look better, they thought more people getting in as well. So they talked
yeah.
Wes Mendez into jumping into the portal, even though he wasn't even going to Tennessee with them.
It's not even funny, but it's just it, this and look, this goes for a lot of stuff right now. It goes for recruiting, it goes for what goes on in dugouts and what goes on the field. I feel like we're living in this place um where it's like let's say you and I both have cars and we're going right down the middle of 65 in rush hour.
Mm-hmm.
And we're both going 90 because we have to keep from getting run over. Well, if you get pulled over, all the cop sees is you're going 90. And you might be going, hey, look, I don't want to drive 90. I want to be driving 55, but I don't have a choice. And that's the place we put everybody in. And
Yeah.
it's gotten really hard to tell who's driving 90 because they want to drive 90. And by the way, would drive 150 if they could. Um, and who's just trying to. I think we are, and I think you and I are baseball guys first. Like at any level,
Yeah.
it's what we like in college. It's my favorite major league sport, and I used to be really, really big on Hall of Fame elections. I used to have real strong opinions of who needs to be in and who needs to be out. And then the late '90s and the 2000s came along, and you don't know what to make of anything anymore. You don't know what to make of anybody's numbers. You don't know these guys come up for ballot. Well, a guy hits 500 homers. Well, what do you automatically think? Well, I know what was going on then.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and people say, well, everybody was doing it. Well, okay. great, but it ruined the game. And I'm like I'm getting on a tangent here. I'm a don't let Pete Rose in the Hall of Fame guy because I think that where he went, it's the one thing that's forbidden. And like we can say he was a great player, but I don't want to put him in the Hall. And now I've lost all interest in trying to sort that out because it got to a point where you had Wally Joyner even said he did steroids for like a few days, and
Hmm.
Andy Pettit was doing stuff, and I think guys he didn't want to, but when your choice is kind of between I I also want to keep my paycheck and my job in the game, and if everybody else is doing, is it even a rule? And I feel like in college baseball we're kind of in that spot where the major leagues in, and the adult there doesn't want to seem to be an adult in the room.
It's sliding down quickly. I mean, you're right because I don't think there's anybody that even feels like they have a choice not to play the game because you just get hit so far dramatically. I mean, it's the
Yeah,
example of the major league side that you're talking about is David DeLucci, who played at Ole Miss. He does a lot of stuff for the SEC Network. He discusses that he had a pretty decent major league career. He didn't do steroids, and maybe resentment is too strong, but he has that thought of
yeah,
what if I had? I would have been a starting, outfielder or a fourth and done, I would have recovered from injury faster and all these things. And you just start having these what ifs in your head. And no, it's where we are with college baseball. I mean, A&M had whatever they had last year and put the roster together, and you're trying to figure out how to make it all work. And we're talking about things that are beyond just the normal scope of NIL that has also gotten so carried away that it's
yeah,
alienated the rest of the country and most of the league at this point. I mean, you intimately cover a team that fascinates me because for a long time you could argue that Vanderbilt was the best baseball job in the country. Still
yeah.
is a very, very good baseball job, but there's no doubt that it has fallen in some level of standing during this course of this new era.
No doubt. And you got fans that want Tim Corbin gone, and I'm thinking, have you lost your mind? I mean,
Yeah.
he's made that program what it is. But that's where we are, and it's kind of like Auburn and Alabama in football. You can be doing just fine, but you lose a few times in that rivalry and nobody cares. And that's kind
Hmm.
of turned into what he's facing with what Tennessee has become.
How do you? And it's a loaded question, so I'm going to be careful how I ask it.
You go
How do you
ask anything.
how do you explain the Tennessee rise to the level that it is?
I
Not that they're
think they're
good. He's a great
yeah,
coach, but to the level that it is. They look superhuman right now, Chris, and they have for 3 years.
yeah. They're really talented. Um I think it's one of those look across the state at what they were doing at Vandy when they got a little taste of it, the money
Okay.
and the support and things flowed. I think that's at least part of it. It's not the most liked program outside of that fan base, but there's no doubt they're good. I look at the freshmen they brought in. Um, those guys are super talented. Now, look,
Hmm.
it's one of these things where they're also playing Hofstra on the weekends in half these games, and they haven't had a road game yet. But the talent they're putting out there is pretty amazing.
Yeah. They're great in that park. They hit a lot of home runs. It's a park that's down
Yeah,
on you. The environment gets after you a little bit. There's reasons why they win a lot of games at Lindsey Nelson. That's
yeah,
not a
yeah.
that
It's
that that's not
it's
a surprise.
it's the perfect situation of coach meets fan base too. They have the same personality and temperament. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, I never thought we'd see a program that would come in and do what they've done, kind of out of the depths of the SEC basement. I mean, they weren't far above Missouri, and Missouri might even be a step ahead of them when they took the
Yeah.
job
Oh,
because
there's no
Beezer
doubt.
had some good teams, but yeah, it's been remarkable.
Who are you buying stock in? Is there a team in the middle level of the league from a perception standpoint that you think's better than they're getting play for right now? I really
Define the
like
middle.
Arkansas, by the way. I mean, they're ranked third in the country. I know that's not a shock, but
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
Omaha national title good.
I was trying to rank these teams earlier, just in terms of just power rank. And I don't have my paper in front of me, but it kind of went like from memory: Tennessee, um, LSU, Arkansas. I think Alabama's in that top quartile. We'll find out a
Oh,
lot this
interesting.
weekend. I
He's done an
think
awesome job.
Florida. Oh yeah, I mean they're scoring runs and preventing them, but we'll see. It's early. There are a lot of no names on that roster, a lot of JUCO kids who haven't had to play this level constantly. I think Florida, if it can stay healthy, is really good, but they're losing guys left and right. Um, Georgia's got that gaudy record, man, but they're having trouble preventing runs. And I know they got a ton of arms. I think ultimately you've got to get outs. I think in that park it works. I would put them 6 or 7. I think after that, Vanderbilt's potentially as good as anybody that's left. I think Mississippi State's better than the record. I'm kind of with you on Ole Miss. I'm afraid that the pitching after Elliott isn't enough on the weekends to hold together. But they've got a resume, and that RPI is a good starting point. And look, you go beat Missouri this weekend. You're 4-2 in the league, and back where we talked about league record being considered, nobody's
You're
going to
okay.
care that Missouri was 3 of those.
No.
So I don't think that quality wise they're in that bunch, but they're good enough to have a shot. Um, let's see who we got left. I don't know what to do with
Auburn,
A&M.
A and
Auburn's
M,
a good team. I
Kentucky.
thought they and Vanderbilt would evenly match. Kentucky is
Okay.
quietly moneyballed it together again.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know how that holds up over a full season. I mean, they've got Oklahoma with Witherspoon on Friday. And I don't think they're quite as good as people think otherwise. But I mean, it's a beauty pageant, Chase.
It is. The next 3 weeks are huge for Ole Miss because can you beat Missouri? Can you do what you're supposed to do? They come back home and play Florida. So can you take advantage for a home series and get that win? Can you try to win one?
Yeah.
And then they go to Kentucky. And it's, hey, if you've got Missouri and Kentucky in 2 out of 3 weeks, you got to make some hay. You can't lose those series if you're trying to get to a number.
Yeah. And let me give you this is the scenario that you're looking for, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think you sweep Missouri and Columbia, which like you kind of want that series on the road
Yeah, you
because
don't
in
want to
that
waste the
that
home win on that one.
right. So you come back, you get Florida. I don't know what Pierce Coppola's status is at that point. I'm guessing he's back, but maybe he's not. I want to say Clemente missed. They had just got Frank Menendez, one of their better relievers. He's done for the year. Kyle Jones, their center fielder, he's done for the year. Curlin, I think, is coming back. You probably would rather catch them this weekend with some of those guys. So that's the bad thing for Ole Miss is maybe you get Florida when it's getting healthier, but it's in Swayze. So you got that. I think at Kentucky, um, they're going to struggle to bomb away. But they can. That's going to be a how sound is your defense because they're going to
Mm-hmm.
bunt and run and do all that kinds of stuff. But it's not overwhelming. You get Tennessee at home. That feels daunting, but we haven't seen them play a road game yet, right? So you don't know there. At South Carolina, winnable. Vandy, you got that in Oxford. So I think you could make the case that the schedule lines up okay for them. Some of the tougher asks are in their park. And look, they're good enough. I think to me, the thing is, Hunter Elliott's got to stay healthy. Um, every time I've watched Connor Spencer pitch, it's an adventure at the end of games. You got to figure that out. Um, and you've got to get quality starts and eat some innings. I think if they can do that, they're good enough to have a shot. I mean, Mormon, Sanford, Hill, Humphrey. That's Furnace. That's not a bad start to a lineup, Chase. I mean, that's enough to keep you in a lot of ball games.
They've run the ball out of the ballpark better than I anticipated. They've hit more home runs. They've put together some things. They just don't move the baseball, Chris. Like they just don't
Yeah.
quality at bats. They strike out a ton. Like it's this three outcome thing that I don't think works the same way in college that it does major leagues. Like Mike's almost got a little too analytics heavy. He resisted it for years and now he shifts constantly. And it's like, Mike, we don't have spray charts that are reliable enough in the college game to shift the way you're shifting. Like it's just too much. So it's been a weird mix, but they're okay. They need more out of the lineup. The Pano kid is just swimming right now, completely swimming. He's really
Yeah.
struggled at shortstop. Luke Ching, who's a transfer from Miami of Ohio, will be the shortstop there for the foreseeable future. He got hit in the face on Friday against Arkansas, so he's been in concussion protocol. I mean, I don't think it's wrong to say they would have won the series had Chang not gotten hit in the face because he wouldn't have made those errors on Sunday. I mean, I get it doesn't play out that way, but in the same vein there. And then they need some bridge. You said it correct. Their bullpen just hasn't been reliable and consistent. They're not sure who those people are. They've got some talent. Mason Morris has really taken a step, but for the most part, they've sort of struggled to figure out how to bridge in this new world that starters don't average 6+ anymore. Well, you've got to find middle relief that can get you from one segment of the game to the other. So it's a little bit of a task, but I do think I'm with you. I think anything less than 3 is a problem for them moving forward this weekend against Missouri. So we'll see.
Yeah, and it's funny stylistically what you talk about because, like, I even heard Kevin O'Sullivan say, "Hey, look, we got a little too power heavy last year." You're
Hmm.
starting to see some coaches go back to, all right, we need to be able to steal a base or lay down a bunt, and like I remember, like when Vanderbilt and Ole Miss used to play, like that was a battle of small ball. I'm not saying those guys didn't have guys that could hit home runs, but man, it was like a track meet. I remember Ole Miss had like the Henry brothers and like they were two schools that could really, they'd have Lance Lynn and Pomeranz on the weekend. And like you felt like you knew what their identity was every year. And so it's just weird to see a coach like Mike Bianco that is adjusted. I think a lot of these coaches have got to feel like a fish out of water just with the changes in style of play and then all the stuff that we touched on earlier.
Yeah, Ole Miss hired Joel Mangrum from the Indians. He was the minor league pitching coordinator for the Indians, and they hired him as pitching coach this year. And when he came in, he said, "Y'all's pickoffs are horrific. We have to hold runners better. Like we're going to get eaten alive
Yeah.
with people small balling us to death and holding runners and not throwing them out." Ole Miss was terrible behind the plate last year. They've tried to shore up the defense. Austin Foley, who's a Kentucky transfer, has been pretty good defensively for Ole Miss back there. So it's been a different sight. I guess last thing, I've kept you much longer because I could just stare and talk to you all day. So I appreciate it. But let's switch gears real quick. How well is the SEC going to do in this first round of this NCAA basketball tournament?
Man, I think it's fascinating. I think the matchups are tremendous. And just outside the SEC for a minute, the number of teams on the 7, 8, 9 seed
Hmm.
lines, like go back and look at the AP poll, the number of teams that were AP top 10 teams, Kansas, Baylor, Gonzaga, and I know I'm leaving some out that. I think
I mean, I
Connecticut.
I don't love UConn, but they are the
Yeah.
back-to-back national champions. They're in 8-9.
Right, right. I mean, I don't ever remember seeing a tournament like this. I have changed my bracket so many times. It's absurd. Now I'll give you some good news, and maybe doesn't feel as solid after what North Carolina did last night. I've got Ole Miss making it to the 8.
Oh
I
wow.
think
Okay.
I think the matchups are manageable. I love their point guard. I think Sean Padula is just a gamer. If Morel's healthy and playing better, they get a little boost there because it felt like he was a non-factor a lot of February. Malik Dia can, kind of take over a game in spurts. I think they're really intriguing, and I don't think they're half of that region. I'm like everybody's good, right? But I don't think that I don't think there's anything in front of Ole Miss that feels unmanageable based on what they did. I think I've got 6 in the Sweet 16 from the SEC. I've got Auburn and
Okay.
Florida in the Final Four, Ole Miss and Tennessee in the Elite Eight. I think that might no, I've got Alabama in the 8 too because I like their draw too. But I think Ole,
That would
Ole
make
Miss
Greg
is really
Sankey really
interesting.
happy.
Yeah,
He'd
well,
be real
yeah,
happy.
we had some fun with it on our show this morning. I said, like, what's a success? Like, is it a success if you get the national champion, but you only get 3 teams in the Sweet 16? Is it
Yeah.
success if you get 8 teams in the Sweet 16, but nobody to the Final Four? Like the number of ways you can answer that question to me is pretty fascinating.
Because the league was so good and this historic thing and has this bullseye on its back where the answer to your question is yes to all of it. No, you have to do it all
Yeah,
almost. Like it's this no
yeah,
any failure is a failure at this juncture. But The league does need a title. I mean, they don't have a title since Kentucky in what, 12?
Gosh, I guess it has been that long.
Yeah, haven't had a title since 12.
Man,
So
I
Ole
think they get one this year with
Miss,
Florida, by the way.
I like Florida too. Yeah. Um, Ole Miss is an interesting game for Friday because, North Carolina was this last team in and all this stuff, and they've got the Tar Heels across the chest. And I think for Ole Miss, some of the fans got really freaked out by the way they handled San Diego State last night, and they blew that game
Yeah.
out. But it's not the best matchup for the Rebels in a couple different ways. The way North Carolina can really get downhill and they force some free throws and things. But the big things Ole Miss wanted to avoid was they didn't want a team with an elite big, and they didn't want a team that was great on the offensive boards. And North Carolina
Yeah.
is neither one of those things. So they're okay, really, from an
Yeah.
analytics matchup when you stare at it. But yeah, I think Ole Miss got a little
Yeah.
freaked out. I guess in your world they would go through Iowa State and then maybe Michigan State on the way to
Well,
the eight.
and this might be just a tad bit of alum bias, but I got Iowa State getting beat by Lipscomb in the first
Oh,
round.
okay.
Um, and some of that's because Iowa State's down Keyshawn Gilbert, and then oh gosh, Taman Lipsey's pulled a groin and didn't play the last game of the Big 12. Now he's going to play, but I don't know if you've ever pulled that muscle before. It doesn't just go away overnight.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm concerned. Lipscomb's one of those teams that can hit a bunch of threes. They got a superstar who's a big scorer. They're well coached. I mean, I don't know. If I had to bet my house on it, Iowa State probably wins the game. But that's when you're taking a bracket. You're like, okay,
That's
upsets are going to happen somewhere. Why not? Right?
yeah, that's
Uh,
fair. What do you got for the Doors? And then I'll let you out of here.
I think St. Mary's is a bad matchup for them. They struggled
Okay.
against tall teams. You didn't even have to be shot blockers. You just had to be there with the presence. And it's, I mean, when you're two post guys who play are 6'7" and 6'8", that's not a good matchup for the guy that was the 6'11" defensive player of the year in this league, and they got a 7-footer. It comes off the bench. Um, I would have liked another draw for Vanderbilt. I think Mark Byington got every bit of everything he could out of that roster. They're not I don't think they're an NCAA tournament caliber roster talent wise. I think privately they would admit that, but he got him there. Hey, just getting there is great for them. It's been a minute. I just think that's not a great matchup, but I wouldn't be shocked if they won it either, Chase.
But Byington was certainly a top three SEC coach of the year, depending on what you thought between Gates and him and Pearl, depending on how you want to
Yeah.
factor in that situation. I think he would have been my number two behind Gates for a lot of the season. Gates taking over that 0-18 team was just hard to argue about there. I'll give you a stat before I get you out of here because I think you'll be shocked. You and I were talking about Vanderbilt and Ole Miss kind of being from a baseball standpoint on the same path for a really really long time. One of the reasons why people are frustrated too, Ole Miss has not hosted a super regional game in Oxford since 2009.
What?
Yeah,
No, okay, 14 they made it to Omaha, didn't they?
they went through Louisiana Lafayette
Okay.
on the road.
Yeah. And here's the funny thing, just like baseball's let's play this over again. See, I thought in 2014, I mean, I remember sizing this up from a Vanderbilt perspective and just thinking Ole Miss is a team that matches up really well with them. You're probably happy there in the other half. And then did they run into
The
Virginia that year?
Virginia beat them in the opener in the ninth inning, and you thought whoever won the opener was going to get through that side of the bracket. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel like the universe kind of owed them a national title in,
mm-hmm.
in 20, what was it, 21?
22.
22, 22. Yeah, I mean, like everybody knows that team wasn't the greatest team, but like he's had so many teams that were just right there. And man, that's really hard to do in sports. People don't appreciate it at all, but I've always really respected what Mike Bianco has done at Ole Miss.
Yeah. Well, enjoy the games, whether it be basketball or baseball. Again, always love catching up with you. And as the SEC season moves on for baseball, let's keep doing it again.
You bet. Thanks, Chase.